And so that's what we're all ultimately, I think, in this time and place in the world, we're actually being asked to make a bigger leap in consciousness than we're used to. Because as Hawkins says, most people don't move up more than a couple points on the scale in every lifetime. We'd like to go a little slow on the rungs.
If you don't have the awareness, you miss it because you get so caught up in this physical linear plane. And the deep work is to get beyond the physical time and live in that divine time, the vertical, that eternal time.
If people are in a relationship they're unhappy with, the best thing to do is for 30 days stop thinking about yourself and just try to actually serve your partner. Just don't even think about what you're getting back. Don't measure it. Don't check in. Am I getting what I think I get back? No, just go and for 30 days play full out, do your part, serve the other person, and then 30 days check back in and see where you're at. I promise you almost all your problems would have probably gone away.
The simplicity is really the truth. If you can get into the oneness, which is everything that you need to know, infinity is in this moment. Have you ever met somebody for the first time and you felt like you've known them before? Or you had a universal language that you both spoke effortlessly? Well, you're in for a treat, because my good friend Sevadeep and I sat down for the very first time and had a conscious conversation, topics that range from personal issues, traumas, global issues, spiritual connection, and higher levels of consciousness. So sit down, we'd love to have your presence and connect to this conversation.
Yeah, the way I've seen it is it was that person's, I call it their karma, because it's maybe they're shedding off something they had experienced. And it's the karma of the people around them and how they respond and react to that scenario.
Exactly.
And that's what I've learned to understand is like even when a child comes in and maybe even dies in the birthing process, which is so traumatic, there's an agenda there where that soul knew that was going to happen. They knew they were coming in for that experience to provide an opportunity for something to shift for those around it that would be so emotionally affected by it that they would be broken open and expand their consciousness and have to go to a greater degree of understanding.
And they had to be the martyr almost in this sense. Maybe not, I mean, but it happened. Everybody, I talked to this guy once and he had studied all the Vedas, Zen traditions, Taoism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism. He studied them all. He says, and then he became an atheist. He said, because how could a God of love, how can the God of oneness allow 6 million kids to die every day of starvation in the world? I can't believe. And he says he's done all the study. I'm just thinking, there's no way you could have done all the studies and come up with that conclusion. That's somebody who's never allowed themselves to get through their conscious state of mind and their time-bound self in the world. You haven't evolved. Because, I mean, what is... Wayne Dyer was once interviewed and says, you know, by an Australian talk show, says, what do you want to do? What's the meaning of life? He says, I just want to learn to think like God thinks. That's my mission. My whole mission here is to think like God. And I think that's kind of like all of our missions, because you ultimately become God, the I am that I am. That's why God gives his name in Exodus to Moses. It was almost like a plea, or I think a cry to say, I am that I am. I am that I am. I am that I am. Like the I am discourses, which was downloaded by Saint Germain, remember by Godfrey Ray King, who was Saint Germain was bringing him this higher level of teaching for all these books. But the I am discourse was about the I am presence and how to be in the I am light and how to be and live and become that. So which, to me, if it's the I am, which is the name of God, we're all here to transmute this physical world into God consciousness, which is to learn to think like God, but then be like God. And then ultimately Yogananda becomes God because he goes back to what he came from. But I believe, like Sri Yukteswar was telling him in that embrace, like he became elevated to such a degree that I think he probably joined Lahiri Maharsha, Babaji, maybe even Dr. Wayne, I don't know what. But it's interesting to think, okay, there is the oneness and the consciousness of divinity and this divine consciousness, but there must be different rungs. I say rungs because there's no other word I can come up with. But when I read that or heard that for the first time from Sri Yukteswar, I thought, I've never had somebody, and the Mormons say that there's different, levels of heaven, but when he incarnated from spirit and back into flesh and then spoke to Yogananda, I thought, wow, there are, and which makes sense. There's these different, just like Dr. Joe, when he's at these conferences and he elevates the coherent energy in the room to such a degree that these other beings can actually enter the room physically. It would make sense. I mean, what do you think about that, Seva? Do you feel like there are these other rungs of,
Yeah, certainly. And I think this is why I like to come back to Hawkins' work, because he lays out the scales of consciousness in
yeah,
our human octave, is what he calls it. So just
right.
like scales of music, there are
Hmm.
octaves, right? And you choose what
String
octaves you want
theory.
to
That's
play
what it
in.
is. Yeah.
There are, there's higher levels and there's lower levels that you can go on, right? There are sounds outside of your human ear that you can pick up on, right? We have things
Right.
like dog whistles.
Hmm.
Those are just the concepts that you can grasp onto to say, okay, I can understand. There's higher and lower vibrations.
Yeah.
And so that's why Hawkins did such a beautiful thing for humanity to map out that scale to say, here's the highest you can go, pure life,
A
Christ,
thousand
Buddha,
megahertz is what
Krishna consciousness.
right, he
These are all
calibrated it at a
synonyms
thousand,
for
I think.
that level of pure life consciousness. And an infant comes in at that level, actually. That's
Yeah.
pure life coming in. That's
Right.
why we're mesmerized by infants, babies, because they carry the pure light of God in them.
That's right.
They're coming in with a clean slate,
Yeah.
right? And then
Hmm.
that scale goes all the way down to fear and grief and ultimately death, which is the thing we fear, which is the idea that we might not exist. Obviously, that's not possible because we are pure energy and we always have existed, we always will exist. There was no beginning, no end to us.
That's right.
But when we came through the birth canal and were birthed into our human form, the people around us could only condition our brains with the information they had.
Yes.
So they programmed us. So everyone on earth goes through their own conditioning process based on their unique environment, which they chose as a soul to choose their parents, and there's relationships there. It's not an
Because they knew the
accident.
lessons that they were going to get in this incarnation. They knew, okay, like Dr. Wayne says, he says before he incarnated, he says, I was with God on a cloud looking down, and God asked him, what do you want to do with this embodiment? He says, I just want to teach people to be to be independent, to be self-actualized.
Mm-hmm.
He says, okay, then we better get your little ass into an orphanage for the first 10 years of your life. So take away your mom, take away your dad, so you can become self-sufficient and independent and self-actualized, because you'd have to be by yourself to do that. If you want to teach that, which that was ultimately his dharma.
Mm-hmm.
And at
Mm-hmm.
75 in 2015, on August 30th, he made his transition in a very miraculous, way.
Mm-hmm.
And the synchronicity about that is that's the same day that he, at 36, went to his father's grave to piss on his grave. Do you
Mm-hmm.
remember that
I
story?
do. I do.
And then after that, he went and wrote Your Erroneous Zones, which is like, one of his most
Right.
successful books.
And that's one of the things I love about Wayne too, is you think of him the way you do and I do, and people remember Wayne and what he stood for, and his content is timeless, right? Because he
Oh,
was
yeah.
talking the spiritual
He
truths of
was
Jesus and Krishna, Buddha. He was preaching the truths that the
truly,
ancients were, right?
he
So
was
he
so
had reached those
approachable.
levels.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing about his path is he didn't write that first book until he was what, 37,
30,
38
yeah,
years old?
exactly, right.
So he had to go on his own journey to become who he had to be to do his dharma
Yeah.
and his truth, right? So we go through our karma and our early path to go through the lessons we came in to learn and also prepare us for our dharma. And it's up to us to ultimately claim that dharma at some point in our life when we're ready to shift off the path that we are conditioned to be on of the personal physical self that lives only in this lifetime. But when we remember our soul's journey, we can come back to our dharma, which is why we're really here at a higher level. And so that's what we're all ultimately, I think, in this time and place in the world, we're actually being asked to make a bigger leap in consciousness than we're used to. Because as Hawkins says, most people don't move up more than a couple points on the scale in every lifetime.
That's
We'd
right.
like to go a little slow on the
Maybe three,
rungs, right?
400.
Most people, probably have pretty consistent lives. They find a little baseline. They find that special someone. They have a few
They get
kids. They
kind
get a
of
job.
complacent, maybe,
We,
like comfortable.
well, here's my theory is it really comes down to our fear of death, which is conditioned into us at birth when we are told that we became a person one day and that we're inevitably going to die another day. That's
Yeah.
conditioned into us, right?
Yes, yes.
And that gets us
Fear
to
death.
think on the lower half of Hawkins' scale,
Hmm.
from intellect down toward fear, because we're trying to prevent our death. So
Yes.
really what we're doing is building what we think is a consistent world in an always changing universe by finding a sense of security, by finding that salary, that consistent place to live, that special someone, those kids, those dogs, building a family. But the whole thing, if you actually sat in it and asked yourself what was driving you, it's a fear of death.
It
It's a
is.
fear of your non-existence because the people around you inappropriately and ignorantly convinced you were going to die because they didn't know their truth. And that's where most of us grow up. And it's up to us to reclaim that somewhere along the way, is to reclaim the truth of our spiritual
We
identity.
get so caught up, like I said, in the no thingness, right? The nothingness. We always are so connected to the things, the physical body, acquiring the job, the relationship, the car, the house, the things seem to take us out of into those lower levels that Hawkins talked about
Mm-hmm.
of consciousness, and we consistently vibrate at those levels. So of course we're going to attract those type of things in our life.
Mm-hmm.
But the shift is to get out of the consciousness that says, okay, I'm complacent and comfortable with a good job, with my family, my 2 kids, my house, because those all are vibrational thoughts and live at a certain realm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The shift is to be able to quantum kind of leap, and which is a state, which is a direction I call it in my book. The Now-ist, it's a step in the direction of you, the highest self in you, the you that's
Mm-hmm.
not connected to a physical body and to a physical being. The human beingness that is you vibrates at Christ consciousness, God consciousness. But as Emerson says, our birth is a sleep and a forgetting. So we keep forgetting. We get numbed down into the Joneses, which is to stay status quo, to just have a good life, get
Mm-hmm.
married, live the traditional life, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's wonderful. I'm blessed to have a lot of that in my life, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't
Mm-hmm.
ever take it for granted.
Absolutely.
But the shift that I've made is realizing that the present moment is the most powerful point of my day that I can connect to consistently. And I in that ratio of 90%, I try to, or I've become, I guess, proficient at living in that ratio of 90% present moment awareness, 10% the things that I do in my life, the job aspect, emails, appointments, doing the things I have to do. But by living in that ratio, it helps me get out of the lower vibrational levels of the materiality, of paying the bills, of doing the things, of having the appointments, of making the living.
Mm-hmm.
It allows my consciousness to live in that state of presence. And when you're in the present moment, there's just this linear timeline,
Mm-hmm.
then there's divine time, and that crossification is the now.
Mm-hmm.
I've just so obsessed with living in the present moment that I call it being a Now-ist. But living in that ratio has allowed me to elevate to these different levels or the different rungs of consciousness, like David Hawkins, like Rumi talks about. And then when I find myself living up there, it feels so freeing that everything else below those vibrational energy rungs, if you will, it's almost like child's play.
Mm-hmm.
Like the money shows up when it needs to, the healing shows up when it needs to, the right people show up in your life.
Mm-hmm.
The deep work is to get in that state consistently, so that then the lower levels of consciousness become like second nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been my experience. That's when I teach people. I'm trying to convince the unconscious mind to become conscious. But it takes repetition, it takes mantras and mudras and prayers and planned meditation and
Mm-hmm.
action, I guess, but it's karma yoga. I forget who was it, by Nisargadatta Maharaj.
Mm-hmm. I
He
know of
said,
him, and I haven't read the
karma
book.
yoga,
Yep.
which is actionless doing.
Yep.
When you can live in karma yoga, which is actionless doing,
Mm-hmm.
you then become
Mm-hmm.
more spirit vibration and less lower frequency.
Mm-hmm.
So actionless doing, and that's karma yoga. So if I can live in that state of being consciously throughout my day, all the other stuff, the doing takes care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's so counterintuitive, and that's what's doing the work that you and I do and living in this conscious conversation. But to live in this conversation in our heads, it's great to have it with somebody else because you and I are vibrating similarly at this frequency. But then to have that conversation with yourself that we're having here inside my head and in my heart, that's another conversation I love to have throughout the day. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah, I
Like
mean, I
when
can
you're
talk about
going,
this all
is
day.
your mind just like going and going and going?
I'm just living this now because
Yeah.
when you actually upgrade your operating system, which is really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to upgrade our baseline reality. It's probably what Elon Musk would say when he says we're living in a
Yeah.
simulation. What's
The
your
software.
baseline, right? Our baseline reality that we're trained to live in is a third dimensional world where we're trained that we're physical people, that we are the body, and that our name is how we identify with that body, and we call that me. And we all have a me. And that is our baseline. So when you
Yes.
ask someone who they think they are and they say, well, I am, whatever they say after that is that's their baseline reality.
Yeah.
Most people think it's their name and they think it's me.
And it's
That's
quite
cool.
limiting, which is,
That's a level. It's like a grade in school. So there are spiritual grades just as like there are grades in school, only it's on the inner plane. So it's the inner ascent up the inner mountain of
mhm.
spirituality, right? You're going up the planes. So you're really turning around and looking within and climbing up a mountain inside yourself of understanding, which is the chakra system, right?
Yes.
You move up the chakra system and you're really learning to see and understand yourself from a higher level. So then when you turn back out and you look at the world, you're observing and perceiving reality from a higher perspective. Just like if you climbed a mountain and then turned back around, you would see more than you did at the ground level. And then if you turned and kept climbing, you turn around, you have a greater perspective. So that's really what we're trying to do, is learn to look within, not without, as the ancient maxim says, right? As above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul, right? So that analogy is like that. All we need is that phrase if we really want to dive into what that means and learn to live that truth, because you're learning to work on the inner planes and raise your understanding of who you are, so that when you come back in the world, you don't think that you are the character. You realize you're the actor. You're
Yes.
actually creator, creating it in the imaging faculty of the mind. Then you're stepping in as the soul, as the actor, playing the character that we are conditioned to think is us. So the things in our life are really like props on a stage. We can't own props. You know the props are there just to help you play that character, right? So it would be like going into a character and playing a billionaire, but then refusing to quit that role and hoarding all of the money of that character and never letting it go, right? That would be crazy, right? The director and the producer, they'd be like, no, 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 that's not your stuff. Those are props, right? That's the same thing with our lives. We come in, but because we don't know that we're spiritual beings, we're conditioned that we're physical beings, we then think we have to go do things to stay alive and collect things. And so our sense of self-worth gets connected to our net worth. And we live in a world that values money as the center object of life. And so, regardless of what you do to get money, if you have a lot of it, you're put up somehow on a pedestal. Maybe people hate you for it, but they still recognize you, at least as thinking that maybe you're somehow succeeding in the game because you have more of this thing called money, which is really just a prop.
Which is a lower vibration, isn't
Right?
it? It's a total lower vibration. That's why Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about your personality is your personal reality. And he says, whatever your personality is, so are you, a stressed out person? Are you focused too much on goals and outcome? Are you really, driven by things that are lower level of energy? Your personality, your personal reality will just react in kind to whatever that focus is, right? Energy flows where your focus goes. It's the law of attraction, your point of attraction, the law of identical harvest. So our deep work is just to change your personality, so you can change your personal reality. That's what I love about his work. Is it's an inside job for him. Obviously, he's working on upregulating, your lower energy fields. He calls them the blessing of the energy fields, upregulating these into higher levels of consciousness. And then you get that pineal gland, right? When you upregulate it to such a degree where you start to have these mystical experiences, where you start to think from the end instead of about the end of the things you want to bring in your life. And that's the deep work. That's what I'm so excited about as I do my coaching and training and teaching with my clients. I'm just so inspired to help them change their personality so they can change their personal reality.
Yep.
And
Yeah, I
that's
love the
the deep
idea
work.
because the personality is actually, the Latin for that is, it refers to a mask worn by actors in ancient
Oh,
times,
does it
right?
really?
The
Oh,
personality
cool.
is a mask, but we think it's me, the physical self. So we confuse the character. And that's why I love Jim Carrey, actually. I
Oh,
think
God, I love Jim
he's a
Carrey. You just
brilliant
said the
leader in
magic word.
consciousness, actually,
I
out in
think
the
he's a
world,
genius.
and he used acting as a way to break his own consciousness free.
And he
And
did
he
it.
had his own mystical experiences, but he achieved the truth and dissolved into the truth of who he is. And he knows that Jim Carrey was just a personality construct like one of his characters. And he realized that when he was going in and out of these characters and going back to Jim Carrey, it was seeming less and less real because he was realizing more of the
Well,
truth.
I'm so glad you brought Jim Carrey because I've loved him since Ace Ventura. It was in the 80s, late 80s, that movie came out.
Yeah,
I just remember
early,
this guy I relate to him because he's goofy and I love to do voices and he loves to do
yeah,
voices and he's so authentically himself. He's of course playing the character that he talked about, that now he's trying to shed.
yeah.
Yet he's still a brilliant actor. But he's realized I don't have to play the character of Jim Carrey anymore. The Jim Carrey character is just this facade.
And that's why I feel like he achieved some freedom. Now he still experiences all the vibrations,
Of course.
sadness, grief. We all do. That's the beauty of it. It's not to resist the other levels. It's to acknowledge what they are. They're part of the playing field. It's like music. You can go on use the lower scales if you want. You can play, you can play wherever
And
you
he
want on the
does, because he's
piano,
still a
right?
prolific actor. He still creates these wonderful roles, and he could play anything, and he can just jump out of and just put that mask on, put that personality on, right? And just play that character. That's what a brilliant actor he is. And I love that Eckhart Tolle, I think, was maybe the one that gave him an epiphany, because he studied with Eckhart Tolle for a while. I mean, I've studied a lot of Eckhart Tolle's work, and that's why knowing that I love Jim Carrey at such a young age, and to know that we kind of similarly took this path into consciousness and the higher vibrational aspect of our incarnation and our being, and he's there now. I mean, he says, depression was something that I used to do. It's not who I am. It's just like, he just had these, if you look up Jim Carrey, anything on the internet, he's everywhere. I think it's because a lot of people want to know that he's come so far, because he was this incredibly gregarious, outgoing, slapstick, phenomenal comedic actor, and now he's like this Zen Buddha,
Mm-hmm.
where he has the dichotomy, like all of us, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
physical bodies in this
Mm-hmm.
spiritual experience, and
Mm-hmm.
he's
Mm-hmm.
shed that identity, but he can go back and forth. That's the fun and the play of it. He still has that whimsical childlike bewilderment, which I love about him. He's not so serious where you realize that, hey, no, I can go back into that character if I want to, but I don't need to get the payoff anymore, to be that
Yeah.
artifice that is Jim Carrey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what we're all here to do, is to shed our old self and our characters along the way and
The
figure
lower
out the
self, right?
truth of
Yeah.
who we are and then step back in as more of the actor on the stage and then say, well, what character do I want to play?
Yeah.
I believe there's actually a greater script for our lives, a greater plan, if you will, that was already written for us, which is our Dharma,
Mm.
and it's connected to what's called the Sanatana Dharma, which is the eternal order of the universe.
That's what
So
Sanatana means?
Sanatana means eternal, and Dharma means order.
Beautiful.
Sanatana
Is
Dharma,
that
the
Sanskrit or
eternal
Hindi?
order. It's the Sanskrit behind it.
Neat.
So individually, we have karma on the personal level that we're working through. Then we have, when we move up to our soul's level, is our Dharma. And then when we connect with the universal, the presence within us, the I, right, the Atma in the Hindu traditions, that's where we tap into the Sanatana Dharma, which is the eternal order of the universe, which is our ability to live our greatest truth, our divine assignment, if you will, on the
Wow.
planet.
That's the deep work. And that's the work that I'm so in love with right now in my life, at this time in my life, at this age in my life. I just feel so blessed with that type of awareness, because
Mm-hmm.
step one in most spiritual transformation is awareness, right? You have to be aware that you're at this point in your life, that you're in trauma, that you're in ecstasy. If you don't have the awareness, you miss it because you get so caught up in this physical linear plane. And the deep work is to get beyond the physical time and live in that divine time, the vertical, that eternal time.
Mm-hmm.
For me, when I learn to live in that moment, that's when I can focus on the things that are of the world, to be of service to the world.
Mm-hmm.
I know you and I have something very similar, a similar inspiration right now and a similar creation. We're both looking to create these films. We're
Mm-hmm.
both working on bringing these films into the world. Because when I learned from Dr. Wayne Dyer, once again, I'm going to talk a lot about him because I love him so much. And he is my guardian angel. He's one of my guardian angels, and he keeps showing up in synchronicities to me as monarch butterflies, or my timing becomes aligned with his divine time, ideas, creation. But I know we both have this mission to create feature films that will serve people, because 10% of people, I learned from Dr. Wayne, read books, but 99% of people go to the movies
Mm.
because everybody loves to be taught an allegory, an analogy, a story. You know, a story teaches you so much because you're getting engrossed in the story. I think Steve Jobs says the storyteller is the most powerful person in the world because they set the trends, they set the
Mm-hmm.
kind of the marks for society to kind of lockstep walk into. And that's what I'm hoping. I think both of our films have that ability. What's your film about?
Well, thank you for asking. It was about 10 years ago I had an experience where my reality shifted in a profound ways, where what most people would call it a near-death experience, where I left this reality altogether and went back into a more of a pure place of pure spirit. I like to say I met God faceless to faceless. And then I came back into this form. And so obviously had a much different perspective on reality than I did up until that moment. Because I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church and I grew up believing in really this physical life. It wasn't even until I was in my mid 20s that I started studying reincarnation and then started expanding my mind of the idea that I might have lived outside of this one body. And that obviously was a ripple effect. So once I dove into that rabbit hole, much more opened up for me about the truth of who I am. And then in 2011 is when I had this experience where I left this world and came back in. And so from that moment on, I developed a new sense of curiosity about the process of becoming itself. And like, what does that really consist of? How do I go from pure spirit, energy, light, formlessness, which I am and know everything to be now, into this experience where I perceive myself and experience myself as this physical being? And that seems so real. And the people around me many of them are very convinced that's real. And I used to be. So there was that dichotomy when I came back in of knowing I am this physical self, but now knowing the truth of who I am. And so I went on a deep discovery process around the nature of reality. And so I traveled to the ancient sites. I read all the sacred texts across the world's religions. I dove into the science of the metaphysics and the quantum mechanics and the cell biology. I looked into nature. And then obviously I went within, which is where the truth resides. And when you do that, when you look at it from all the angles, you can put together new models of reality. So what I realized along the way in wanting to share that was the best way to share it wasn't actually to just simply write it out in some sort of nonfiction book and explain it, because I really wanted it to transform the reader into having the experience of knowing who they are and living that truth. And the best way to do that isn't through the analytical mind. So when you read a nonfiction book, the whole time you're reading it, your brain is analyzing everything you read and relating it back to what you believe you already know about reality based on your conditioning. So the whole time, every idea is being critiqued. So you might finish that book and be blown away by some of the concepts, but few of them might make their way all the way into the subconscious to do that reprogramming to allow you to go to that next level. So what I realized along that journey was in my commitment to having the work impact the way I wanted it, the art, I knew that it had to change forms, and it became a fictional journey of these characters that emerged in this world that emerged, which is really a commentary on consciousness, but done through story form. And I think that's why you were saying that artists use this storytelling as a way, because it allows the reader and the audience to even go to a higher level while they're in the experience of going through the material, so that as they go through, that transformation is taking place. And when they finish that work, something has really shifted within, because they weren't critiquing it along the way, they were experiencing the journey along the way, and then they're left in that new place, that new now, and whatever has shifted for them now is going to manifest.
It's the parables, isn't it? I mean, think of it, Jesus in the parables. Think about Lao Tzu dictating the Tao Te Ching to the gatekeeper of the city. Right? He verbally recounted the 81 verses, and then they scribed them down on tablets, and there's the Tao Te Ching, 2,500-year-old book. You know, it's 500 years older than the Bible, and that's one of the wisest teachings they say ever written. What is that, though? They're just a bunch of stories, a bunch of stories.
And what is the first, the
Parables.
first words of the Tao Te Ching? The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name, right? And that's the one spirit saying, listen, many are the paths of men, but all in the end lead to me. They all go back to the top of the mountain.
To the
so
I
if
am.
you want to achieve the pureness of spirit, you can take a lot of the different pathways that are out there, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism. I've tried them all. I think they're all beautiful. But at the end, if you want to go back to pure spirit, you have to give up all of them to get back to oneness.
Because there is no name.
There is no name.
That's why the very first of the 81 is the Tao that can be named is not the Tao.
Right.
How beautiful is that and profound, because it's the first one. There is only one. There is no duality. There's just oneness. And I love the fact that living in that oneness, for me, it's a reminder, because N-O-W spelled backwards is one. We're in the now, it's a homonym, also one. One infinite source, one divine mind. And the work is to learn to live in that, to shed, like you said, all the different religions. Because in my experience, religions tend to separate people, whereas spirituality wants to unite them into that oneness. Because ultimately, Lao Tzu was trying to teach that through 81, which I think he just must have downloaded those as well, right, from source. He must have just downloaded these brilliant, simple, naturalistic, aesthetic. They're so simple, yet there's so many meanings you can have for each one. I mean, I've read it many times and listened to it many times. And every time I read it, I learn something new. And they're just short little 81 verses.
Yeah, the way I've learned to interpret those things is, once again, David Hawkins does a great job of explaining it, is that as we vibrate at certain levels of consciousness, works of art vibrate at certain levels of consciousness, and they are created by people channeling certain things. And that's why a great work of art might come through someone that maybe in the rest of their life, they might not even necessarily be living the highest standards, but there's something about that art that's calling them to that highest
Coming
level.
through.
That's
Yeah.
saying they're committed to creating something, tapping into something. And when they work on that art, they're going to that level to get it. And that's why it might even take years. It took me many years to channel my work,
Yeah,
because
it's
I
right
knew I
on
had
time, isn't
to
it?
be at that place every time I worked on it to honor it. I couldn't just say, oh, I'm going to scrap out some words and write this. It was,
Yeah.
I wanted to embody something. And so I had to be embodying it in the process of it.
Seva, have you heard the saying, the universe likes speed? Have you heard that? Obviously, it's very
sure.
David Hawkins, isn't it? But the thing is, like, most people have goals, right? I don't believe in goals. I believe in thinking from the end instead of about the end, living in the end in your imagination in the oneness. Thinking from the end is a vibrational frequency that David Hawkins spoke about. Many teachers talked about. Jesus says, believe that you have received and you will receive. You have to believe it. You have to vibrate. You have to feel all five of your senses connected to it. So the works of art, the film that you're writing, the film that me and my partner, Mike Balker, are writing, they came through exactly at the right time. You know, because the universe likes speed. And I believe, like when I wrote the book, The Now-ist, I had this great idea and this feeling, and it just like this inspiration came through me. And I know that if I didn't take the mantle of that inspiration and take it to its completion, that it would have moved on. I would have walked into a Barnes & Noble bookstore someday, a year from now, and said, oh, there's the Now-ist. That's the same title, the same symbol, the same everything that was coming through me, because the universe likes speed. So our ideas of creating film now and creating feature-length films that are based on stories and allegories and parables to teach people are coming through because it's their time. It's just a matter of aligning with that divine time and living in that fast frequency, that high vibrational frequency. Then it becomes effortless, right? Some of the greatest songs have been written in 10 minutes, 5 minutes. They're just effortless. They just came through. Same works of art, paintings, sculptures, books, stories, prose. It comes through you.
Well, it's beautifully said, because even though I would say it took me many years for this work of art to come to fruition, the truth is every time I worked on it, I was going back into no time to work on it, which is a flow
Yes,
state,
there
which is
is no
what you're
time.
trying to do is go up the scales of your vibration to access the place of no time, pure flow, as spirit's coming through you. So the book was written in no time, but it outpictured through seemingly many years of that process in my own journey. But as you said, it was all in divine timing.
Perfectly placed. Like the
So,
inspiration had to come when it came.
yep.
Because the idea wasn't ready, the chick wasn't ready to hatch out of the egg yet. It wasn't time. But you were there, you were present, and if you're truly allowing, letting go and letting God, as they say in the recovery movement, if you can just allow, and that's what I'm so excited. I feel you're you're cut from the same cloth in the sense that we have these inspirations, these ideas, this creation of these feature films coming through us, these stories are coming through us, but it's about letting go and getting out of the way and allowing it just to happen. Yes, we have work ethic and we are excited and inspired to do it, but the creation cannot be touched with your hands. I mean, Da Vinci said, first it's in your mind and then it's in your hand. I mean, that was a clue for how he created some of the greatest works of art in history.
Yeah, when I love the story that Tony Robbins tells about Walt and Roy Disney, because the Disney brothers built Disney together. Really, most people know Walt, but most people don't know that his brother Roy was basically the operations behind it, the money behind it. He
Right.
basically was the business mind behind Walt's creativity. So when they created Disney World down in Florida, Walt Disney passed on right before they opened Disney World.
In
And
Anaheim, right?
so,
Yeah.
well, no, this is the
Oh, in
Florida one.
Florida. Got
So
you.
he never got to see the Florida one open. And so at the grand opening, Roy was giving a talk, and somebody shouted out like how it was so sad that Walt never got to be there to see it. And Roy looked at him and he said, Walt did see it in his mind, and that's why we're here today.
Hey.
Because the idea was he was imagining something, and it came to fruition over many years, and all the people that came. And think about your film. Think about films today. How many people have to come together to make that into
Hundreds, literally
something,
hundreds,
right?
yeah.
But it starts with one person, and then maybe a couple others, and there's a vision, and there's a higher order trying to manifest, right? And then a team has to come together and hold to that vision,
Yes.
and all play their part toward that greater outpicturing, which may take days, weeks, months, maybe years, maybe even decades for some things, right? But
Right.
that is the creative process. And that's why I love film, though, because it's a medium that brings people together. And so I spent these last few years working on the book, which was so fulfilling in its own right. But the truth is, I've been really excited to get to this next phase, which is the bringing together of all these beautiful people that have their own genius, that get to play these other roles, these characters, to make it come
I
alive.
love how Roy said that Walt already experienced it because that's the reality. He knew. And this is like, I don't know, was it the 60s that it was opened?
I don't know the exact year.
50s
I
or
think it was
60s?
about then,
But think
50s, I
about how
think.
ahead of the
Yeah.
time and the imaginary luminary that Walt Disney was, because he already lived with all five of his senses probably for years in what this park was going to feel like, the exuberance, the joy the kids were going to feel in the rides and the pictures and the movies are on, the books and these characters. I mean, that's what we have to do as people. That's what people watching this need to do. You have to live into your vision, but you have to think from the end, not about the end. I mean, Walt probably didn't have a date that this thing was going to be done. He just knew that he was living in it consistently, and then he vibrated at such a high level of imagination and frequency as if it was done, that all the other pieces just came together.
Yeah,
And that's the
exactly.
deep work that people have to learn to do is let go, live in that high vibration, live in that end that feels so connected to all five of your senses, and then just get out of the way and let the synchronicities and the signs just show you how it happens. That's why I'm so excited about this. I've never written a movie before, I never created a movie before, and my partner Mike Balker and I are so in alignment with the story, and we're almost done with the script. But I just know that the right people will show up. The timing will be good. And allowing myself to let go at the beginning is something I've never done before on a creative artistic endeavor. I usually think I'm going to work hard, I'm going to study, I'm going to woodshed, I'm going to get better at singing or creating the music for this movie or for this song. But this movie is going to come from a different type of energy. It's going to come from a freedom of allowing myself to be lived by the movie and not try so hard to make it happen.
Well, it's beautifully stated, and it's beautiful to acknowledge that going in, so to give yourself a new approach, right? You can take that approach and see if you can
It's
go
more
all the way
fun,
through
isn't it?
from this
It's so
approach and
much
see.
more fun. And
Yeah,
I offer it up to you. You'll do
sure.
the same thing, I'm
Yeah.
sure. Because when you do this, when you feel called, it's a calling. God like gave me a call. Literally, I picked up the phone. I answered the call, just like the book or the music or the songs that my bandmate and I have written. It's just a calling, and you just let go, and you answer the call, and you okay, it's done. There's no if it's going to happen. It's just a matter of we know why it's going to happen. We just don't know when it's going to happen, and that's okay. And I wish more people could adopt that feeling because they would have so much more abundance in their life in all areas. They just let go and allowed.
Yeah, well, I think it's beautifully said the way you said it was like an answering a call. It's like an inner call to God, right?
Truly.
And I think that, when I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, one of the things I took from it later, because I always like to go back to all the religions and find the great things in them, is the Lord's Prayer that I learned as a
Amen.
kid. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right? Not my will.
Yes.
Thy will, God,
Surrender.
right?
Give it
But
up.
we're not taught that growing up because we're taught we are the physical and we're taught
Yes.
to create our own lives and that in some ways we're on our own in this world
Work
and
hard,
work
right?
hard
Yeah.
and so we have to go back to those truths and recalibrate ourselves inside to those truths because if you can calibrate to that truth and do God's will, right, then it's actually already done at the higher level. So the thing you're trying to outpicture at another level of consciousness is done and complete and already perfect. You're just now the actor on stage playing out the actions that you are being told are necessary to go through the process of getting to that place where that thing's done. So it's David Hawkins would say the causation is all outside of time and place. Causation's up here.
Yeah.
We're taught that cause and effect are all in the physical, like billiard balls in a pool table. You hit one ball, it hits another ball, and it goes in the hole. Causation is outside of that. Causation happens up here. The first billiard ball hitting the billiard ball, all of it is being caused outside of time, right? So the vision already exists. And you're looking to go up and be in that place of seeing it and then out picturing it and experiencing that on
I
the lower
love that you
levels.
brought up the Lord's Prayer and thy will be done. I mean, there's very few words and sentences that have connected in such powerful ways as those few words. Because you think of Genesis in the beginning, right? God created the heavens, the earth, everything, and his work was done, and it was good. Which means I believe every single opportunity, creation, scenario has already been created. It's just a matter of us aligning to God's will, because it's already done. You just have to imagine, for instance, your film. You see your film completed, done. You're here at the theater screening the first time. All the work is done. If you can do that consistently and hold that vibration, it's already done. It's just a matter of you getting out of the way and allowing it to come through. Most of us love to get our hands dirty and muck up the way because we force it through stress, through overwhelm, through things aren't going to work out because you got to work hard because I've been taught you've got to work hard. You got to make it happen. You got to have to-do lists. You got to have schedules. That's all good, well and good. I mean, I live in the physical world and I have to do things in physical time to take care of my family and my obligations. But what I've learned is so much easier is to live in thy will, God's will, and let it be done and not have to work to get it done.
All the pressure comes from thinking you're doing it and thinking you're separate than
It's the
God
lie,
and it's your
isn't it?
plan, right? So I say on God's time and on God's dime, God's
Oh, I
money.
like that. I've never heard that before.
God's plan, God's hands.
That's good.
But just surrender it all,
But
right?
God's time, God's dime.
Because think
That's
about it.
good.
All the money is God's. All
Amen.
the money people don't think they have is God's. All the money they think they do
Yes,
have, it's God's. None
absolutely.
of it is actually your money. We can't own things in this world. All we can do is steward.
You're borrowing
We
them.
can
Yeah.
steward God's resources while we're here, right? So the best thing to do is surrender it all to God. Know that it's all God. Get rid of your plan. Go back to God's plan. There is a higher order for you, and
If
get
you
in
want more of
alignment with
God's
it.
resources, all you have to do is give them away.
Give them
You want more
away.
money? Give away money. You want more health?
Exactly.
Give your energy to someone else.
Right.
You have a bad relationship? Try and help somebody in a poor relationship. Yours will get better. It's
Right.
so counterintuitive, but
Most people don't realize in a
give God's dime
relationship,
away,
if
right? You
people
give it
are in a
away.
relationship they're unhappy with, the best thing to do is for 30 days stop thinking about yourself and just try to actually serve your partner.
Mm.
Just don't even think about what you're getting back. Don't measure it. Don't check in. Am I getting what I think I get back? No, just go and for 30 days play full out, do your part, serve the other person, and then 30 days check back in and see where you're at. I promise you almost all your problems would have probably gone away.
I love that you said that because in the book, The Now-ist, I interviewed about 100 couples because my wife and I have been married almost 30 years. And I've realized that you really have to work hard at marriage. I think it's a 60% divorce rate. Even Christian families have the same divorce rate. As God is the center, which is a very important part of our relationship, is God is the center of our marriage. Our beautiful daughter, our life, it all connects to the oneness of God's love and grace in our life. And when I've studied all of these different couples, there's this one couple that had been married for 40 years. And she gave me the best one-liner. And she says, I asked her, how do you keep, Cecilia, how do you stay in love with your husband and stay married that long? She says, we don't keep score, which is basically what you said. Always find a way to be of service to the other person. Don't keep score if they've unloaded the dishwasher and you expect him to walk the dog. Just always be of service. And that's served our life, almost 30 years of marriage. And that I would say is the one precept that's helped us through the tough times of marriage.
Yeah, I think it's well said. And I think, like, if you think about the levels of the consciousness once again, we're taught that we have to have things. And then in order to have them, we have to do them. And at the end of the day, maybe if you do it well enough, at the end of your life, you'll get to just be and you won't have to worry about things, right? But the truth is the opposite. We're human beings, right? So we're taught that we have to get things. So usually we're keeping score on what we're getting in the relationship, right? Then if you move to that next level, maybe it's a trade. I'm giving, but what am I also getting
Quid
back?
pro quo, right?
But the highest level is just the service. No, you don't need anything. You're already full. You're already
The
complete.
crazy
You
part
are
is
full
the
as you
more
are
you
spirit. You
serve,
don't.
though, the more you will
Well,
receive.
and that's the law of life. What
Jesus
you put
said
out
it
is what you get
in
back.
Luke, I think it was, right? Give,
Right.
and it will be given you. Good measure, shaken together, pressed down,
Right.
will be poured in your lap. For the measure you give will be measured back to you. I mean, that's a simple clue on abundance. It's almost like a system of abundance. Why do we get so caught up in the hanging on? It's like the story of the talents, the same, that story
Of
from the Bible.
course. Yeah.
Like, that's the story of abundance and how to create wealth in your life. It's all right there.
Yeah, it's all in the giving, but it comes down to our fear of death because we think we're physical, and we think at the end of the day we might not exist, and we haven't come to
That's where
terms with
hoarding
that.
comes in, isn't it?
All hoarding comes from that, is believing
Yes.
in only the physical side of life, in that your net worth is your self worth, and all you've accumulated is who you are, and you're afraid to confront that, and that's what hoarding is. And it's all in the physical self, in the physical things, the manifestation. I think the easiest way to understand it is to go back to the great Albert Einstein, who in his famous 1905 paper on relativity gave us the phrase E equals mc squared.
Hmm.
That equation actually shares deep spiritual truth in it, right? Because what he's saying there is energy and matter are interchangeable. We are energy and we are expressing as the matter, right? But when we're born, we're taught that we're the matter, right? So we're taught we're the M, but we're the E. And if anything, we're the speed of light squared. But we're
That's what
focused
the
on,
C is? Is that what the C
yeah,
is?
so we're focused on the matter, a few particles coming together. That's the smallest part of the equation. We're the energy expressing as speed of light squared times the particles, right? So, but our whole identity is conditioned to think that we are the mass, the matter, the particles.
Einstein, I love you brought him up too because he has one of the greatest quotes I think he ever said, in my opinion, is imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge can take you from A to B, but imagination encircles the earth, the globe. He realized that because all of his creations come from his imagination. It doesn't come from his thinking mind. It was like spirit. It's just like he downloaded that equation,
Right.
right? He wouldn't say his thinking gray matter created this brilliant, you know, I think he won the Nobel Prize for special relativity or not even that equation.
Yeah, he tapped into one of the truths of the universe that was
And he knew
given to
it.
him in a equation that he was able to give to us.
Right.
And because we trusted him, it stood the test of time. But most people don't understand the spiritual truth behind it. And so this is why I know you can find the answers through the science and the quantum, but you have to have some sort of spirit to back it. Because if you don't know the inner truths and the spiritual truths, and you're just studying the outside world, it can get a little scary because you do disappear at some point. Because once you dive into the particles and all the quantum mechanics teaches us these days, all matter eventually disappears,
into
right?
string
The
theory, which is
particles go
energy,
back into the waves,
right?
right? So, but if you don't know that you are pure spirit backing that, it might just feel like you disappear and you can go into a dark hole and get really depressed thinking about that world. But that's just the externalization of it. The internalization is that we're light, pure light energy expressing as that.
I'm glad you brought up quantum physics because right now I'm working with a friend of mine. He's a brilliant physicist, and I have so many questions for him because he's brilliant, he's a genius. And I'm just so fascinated about the play of the numbers, the math, the quantum mechanics. I mean, crazy concepts like quantum entanglement and non-locality, and how that relates to spirit. And now they've got string theory, which is like the little strings beyond a cork, right? Is this, we're all just, it breaks down to energy. I mean, this is all just energy. It's just vibrating very slow so we can see it and we can feel it. But energy ultimately is God, right?
The
The
universe,
source,
God,
the God
source,
particle. I think, is
whatever
that
you
what they
want to
call
call
the
it.
string? Is that considered the
I don't
God?
actually know. I don't know all the depths of string
It's
theory.
just so fascinating to me
But
because ultimately I love studying it because to me it just proves what I already believed more, but in a mechanical, physical way to explain to people. Whereas physicists or atheists, they don't believe in God. They say it all comes from naturalism or creationism or the
And that's
Big
why I
Bang.
say that you can only go so far with science. And that's why David Hawkins says one of the big shifts takes place is at the level of 500. So the scale is from 0 to 1,000 for anyone that doesn't know. At the 1,000 is pure life, Christ consciousness, Buddha, Krishna. At the bottom is death, basically, fear, grief, right? But in the middle is love. So you have to shift from the intellect and reason, which is the level of 400, and eventually you have to make the shift from your head to your heart to go
Yes.
to the top half of the scale, because otherwise your mind becomes the barrier to your consciousness. And that's why a lot of the great thinkers today that are trying to control our world are actually doing more harm than good,
Yeah.
because they're not living through their hearts yet. They're not living on the top half of the scales. So the Bill Gates of the world, not to use, I'm not name a lot of
Yes.
names, but I have to point somebody out as an example. Great man, but sorry, vaccinating the whole world because we're scared of death is operating on the bottom of the scale,
Yes.
right? We want to go up onto the
It's
top half of the
upregulating
scale,
fourth,
right?
fifth,
So we have
sixth,
to move
seventh
through that
chakra.
idea that we have to, out of fear, inoculate everyone constantly with vaccines. No, 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 no. That's really
It's always about
misguided.
control, though, isn't it? When you start getting the thinking
Right.
mind involved, it's about control. This physical, temporal world, we have to be in control because you can control people with fear. So, fear, vaccines, COVID, there's so many things you can say and do to create fear for people. Look at the wars that are going on right now. Wars are fought and, you know, killing people over fear.
Yep.
It's control, fear of losing control, wanting more land, wanting more control, more power. I mean, John Emmert said absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we know money and power are kind of inextricably linked. So it's important. How do you upregulate, right? The lower two, second, and third chakra, that's creation, right? That's kind of where the money comes. But when you can get to your fourth chakra, your heart, fifth, sixth, seventh,
Yeah,
you
you're
start,
trying to shift into the heart. And David Hawkins' scale maps perfectly to the chakra system, right?
yeah,
So the
1,000
heart
is
is
up here, right?
500, and you're trying to go up to the throat chakra, which is speaking your truth. You're trying to move up to the third eye chakra, which is enlightenment, and you're trying to, which is really the first eye, not the third eye, right? Because we're
Yes.
spiritual beings. We're spirit first, matter second. These are our second and third eyes. First eye. And that's one of the big shifts that wants to happen in the world today is we need to, like I was saying, you need to change your base reality to a higher order right now is what's being asked, which means identifying your spiritual truth as your identity, not saying, oh, well, I like the idea I have a soul. I like the idea I have a spirit. No, you are that. And you have to claim that in your own consciousness. And that will get you to the top half of the scale.
Well, David Hawkins must love, I think it was St. Paul that said it, but it says, "If thine eye be single, your whole body will be filled with light." I mean, there's the transmutation, right, of the thinking mind, right, and your singularity and the single oneness of living in that oneness, which they say your pineal gland, right? You're getting your energy frequency, you're upregulating your energy to that third eye, which is thine eye being single, your whole body will be filled with light. That's the light of the world. That's the light of God. That's the I am presence in God consciousness. But it is about upregulating and transmuting these lower frequencies that we all live in. But you can do it with your mind. That's the thing. The thinking mind can help get you into your heart, gives you awareness. Awareness is usually step one, which comes from a conscious awareness that you are more than just this physical being.
Yeah, and most people don't know that we actually, within our consciousness, have a blueprint, a light blueprint of our body, our grid, that this is manifested on. So that's what he means by that I be single, your body will be made of light, because the truth of who you are is you are a light body. We have auric fields around us that are our true nature. This is just the effect of those other levels. So the truth of who we are is light. This is the expression of the truth of who we are. So that's one of the shifts that's taking place is we're moving up to the higher levels, understanding that we already have these patterns that our physical bodies are built on. These are expressions of the light patterns, which is called the Christ pattern. So we all have a Christ consciousness, a blueprint for who and what we are, and all of our incarnations manifest off this blueprint. So when we go through samsara, which is the cycle of birth and rebirth, we are born again and again and again in our journey on earth. All of those externalizations are off of that blueprint for who we are that exists outside of time and place. So when we leave the body, we still have that to go back to then manifest and externalize another form if we choose.
So tell me about the book. Do you have a title for it? What's the synopsis?
Yeah, the book's called The Way Shower, and it's the first part of a trilogy. And I like to say it's Harry Potter meets the Matrix.
Cool.
It's a high fantasy meets spiritual science fiction, and it really toes the line between reality and non-reality, fiction and nonfiction. And it's a commentary on humanity and consciousness today. And so like I was saying, I had that experience where I left this reality system and came back in, and I really wanted to share that, what I had seen, what I was observing. And it took the form of this really beautiful journey of a young girl who feels alone in the world, and she goes looking for answers. And so her and her new friends become the heroes that the world needs to try to tackle the darkness coming for the
On a
planet.
trek, right? On a journey.
Exactly. So they begin this journey in this first book, The Way Shower, and I'll be adapting it into a graphic novel and a feature film next. And
Beautiful.
so that'll be the next 3 years or so is going
I
to be
love
graphic
it.
novel and feature film, and then I'm going to go back and do the sequel and the same thing, and then the trilogy. And it's going to be about another 8 or 9 years, I think, for the whole
Wonderful.
project to
You have the
externalize and
vision, and that's where it
manifest.
all starts,
Yeah, I've
isn't
been
it?
carrying the vision for a long time, and I'm just, one day at a
And
time.
how is your book almost
The
complete?
book's done now. It's
Wow,
already in print, and it'll be
congratulations.
going to sale like any day now,
Oh my
actually.
gosh.
So
Where could people find it?
I'll be linking to it
Okay.
online. I'm actually going to be controlling the project myself. I decided I really
Fantastic.
want to just. It's a really
I
heart-based
totally agree with that.
project.
I self-published the Now-ist through
Yeah,
Balboa Press, which is a wonderful self-publishing company.
yeah. Bobo, it's through Hay House, I
Yes,
believe,
exactly,
right?
through
Yeah,
Hay House, and
exactly.
it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the journey and staying with the project and really sharing the ideas through this form, which is a fictional story, but it really addresses a lot of these ideas we're talking about. And I really wanted to use that vehicle of a story to tackle some of these really tough problems and questions that we all have, like who am I, where am I from, and what is God? What are we all doing here?
how do you answer the question, who am I?
Do I need an answer?
I'm just asking because I have my answer, I know, and what I've learned through who am I. I'm curious if you have, you don't have to have an answer. If there's no answer necessary. No, I just know from me, but I want to ask you the
Yeah,
question. I
no, it's
want
a
you to
great
answer the question
question.
first.
And what I mean by that is every answer is, I think, sometimes a step away from what that answer is,
Hmm.
right? And that's why the age-old question is, who am I? It's to go back and to go to deeper levels of actually understanding that question. So the truth is, I went deep enough into that journey that I disappeared back into nothingness.
Awesome.
And so what I am is spirit, pure spirit, and externalizing through a form. And as we all are, and we all have our own
Absolutely.
awareness of that, and I
I
think it's a
totally
beautiful
agree.
thing.
And I have a very similar, I'm probably the same answer. I've realized that who am I is kind of an anagram where you reverse it. I am,
Mm.
right? Who am I? I
Mm-hmm.
am. Oh, if you
Mm.
reverse that,
Yeah,
those series of
I like
letters,
that.
who am I?
Right,
I am. Oh,
right,
I am is the name of God. So
right.
you are one with God. You are returning to spirit. You are
Mm-hmm.
from source, you return to source.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically the same answer, isn't
It
it?
is, and I think the way I like to explain it is we live in this duality-based system where we have these two questions: who am I, and what is God? But if you keep going to the truth of those statements, they eventually merge into the same thing,
Right.
right? And
And
then they
to,
eventually disappear,
yes.
actually. So
And it's
we're
just,
really coming out of nothingness to that one thing through the lens of duality is the experience that
and
we're
it's
all
so
having.
difficult, isn't it, for most people, I think, in this world, in the physical world, in this lower vibrational world, to think, because your thinking mind is the great barrier, isn't it, to the heart
It's the
energy and
human
to,
mind,
yes,
the
the human,
intellect.
yes, it limits us so much. Even in quantum physics and quantum mechanics and all this crazy like math that almost makes your ears fry and steam is coming out because you're just like, how do I get my head around this? Like, where does this come from? What is infinity? How can there be trillions of galaxies out there? I mean, how can
Hmm.
we just be one planet spinning through this and a lot of people have maintained that we're the only intelligent life in the entire universe when we think it's infinite, and the universe is supposedly expanding, right? And it's going to contract, and like just getting those concepts, those are all man-made concepts. What I've learned though is like the simplicity is really the truth. If you can get into the oneness, which is everything that you need to know, infinity is in this moment. Because I've read a lot of stories about people that have gone on these near-death experiences, and these NDEs, they've gone up, they've come back, and the minute they make their transition, they know everything. They see all their lives in one moment, which is now. So the oneness, the moment that you live in all this complexity, it all comes to the simplicity of the oneness in just one moment. So whenever I get my head spun around studying quantum mechanics and quantum physics and non-locality and the Schrodinger's equation and all this crazy string theory, like I just come back to this moment. I just connect with God in this oneness, in gratitude, and everything is understood.
How about your book? I'd love to hear more about your work. And
Well, the book's called The Now-ist, Finding the Science to Your Ultimate Desires in No Time, and it came out in 2018. And I've been blessed to speak all over the world on it. I've done 2 live events. My bandmate and I, we have a band called Present Tense. We wrote an entire 10-song album around this, which we performed at both live events. And all this has been leading me up, this teaching, this book, this inspiration, this dharma, this purpose, this mission that I have on my heart to create this legion of Nowists, people that live in the present moment as a way of life, not as a religion, but as a spiritual practice, to live in the present moment 90% of your day with kind of Christ consciousness, learning to think like God thinks, which is living in this infinite time, which I call the vertical, because the horizontal, this is this linear time, this past future time. The linear time pulls people into stress and anxiety and past future focus. There's a lot of energy and tension in that. But when you can get that crossification where the linear time and the vertical time meet, that's the now. So living in that oneness, the Now-ist symbol, which is the cover of my book, you see the crossification, this explosion of light, which is the light of the world, which is Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Jesus always says, you are the light of the world. To live in that light oneness, which is that infinite time, to live as a Now-ist, I've found to be the most powerful moment of our daily life. And so I teach people how to live that way as a ritualistic, a pattern, a series of events to live throughout your life, and practices and precepts to live out of physical time and in the oneness, connected to your imagination. Because I believe your human imagination is one of the greatest gifts God has ever given us. So you can live in that imagination in the oneness from the end. It seems very complex, but to me, when I live in that space consistently, my timing is good. I have no stress. I'm blessed to live with very little stress in my life because I've adopted this way of living. And I know the teaching came through me. That's why I'm just so excited to get it into a feature-length film, because I've realized that 10% of people in the world read books, but 99% of people go to the movies. They watch it on the big screen, the small screen, the TV screen. And if you can, like your movie, if you can get in your book, getting parables, allegories, storytelling to such a degree where people just feel it and they're invested, it seeps through your conscious mind into your subconscious mind. Then you start to apply it to your life. And that's the deep work, and that's the repetition. There's an old German proverb that says repetition is the mother of skill. The more you do anything, it becomes second nature, and that 95% of everything we do is with our subconscious mind anyway. My prayer is for people to live in the present moment as a way of life so we can serve the planet out of stress, overwhelming anxiety and fear, and live in the oneness, which is ultimately living like God.
and I think it's beautiful the way you're approaching it, where you wrote the book The Nowist and now going into this feature film, which is kind of going to this next evolution of a sharing of similar concepts, right? Because people need different modalities, and we need to hit our minds from different angles, even because some of us have resistance to some, and some of us are more open to other areas. So even like
Absolutely.
you're saying, 10% of people read books, most people watch movies these days. It's another reason I'm looking to do the graphic novel with mine, is it's a whole audience of people and a visual
Oh my
storytelling,
gosh,
where a lot
yes.
of people that read these graphic novels don't read books. Everyone, and in the research for going to print with this book, I've been asking a lot of people kind of their modalities. And what I've been surprised by is how much of a variant there is. Some people love to listen to audiobooks. Some people read on their Kindles. Some people actually do the physical hardcover books. Some
Yes,
people are graphic novels. Some
right.
people only watch,
What matters is
so
what you feel
exactly.
called to and inspired to. That's the right thing to do, and not get caught up with everybody else's opinion, right? You find yourself going back to your heart center and to your inspiration, to what makes you feel connected to the project.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm creating it from a heart space, and now that I'm externalizing it, though, it's really about how does it meet that audience in what format,
Yeah.
and really like, and
You
that's
do
why
you could do
one
it
of
all
my,
if you
well,
want.
I have to say,
Yeah.
one of my favorite drafts to do on my book, because I mean, if you looked up perfectionist in the dictionary, you'd see my picture there. But when you work on something you care about, that's what it is. You're
Yeah.
really honoring something that's trying to come through,
Yes.
right? And you know
It's
it'll
your
be
vision.
done when it's done,
Yeah.
right? And that's what I found. So one of my favorite drafts on this book was the last draft I did, where the book was done, but what I had to do was listen to it. And
Mm.
so I read it out loud, and
The
you
whole
would
thing?
not believe how many words changed along the way to attune it to the
Wow.
inner ear.
So
And
smart.
what I was left with was
So you
I was
already have your
blown away.
book on
I was
Audible.
blown away by
Do you
it.
have it on Audible? Did you
No, I'm
record
going
the
to
whole
be
thing?
turning it into Audible
You
now.
got
But
to.
now I needed to make sure the string of words, it's like a
Hmm.
piece of music. It's like a
Yes.
symphony.
Right.
Or I needed every note to hit,
That's
right?
so
And
good.
so that's what it was. It was about making sure it attuned. And now what I was left with was like something
I
that was
love how you
so
put that because
polished.
being a musician and loving movies and music and creation, especially auditory kinesthetic type of art, that tuning a book. I've never heard someone say, I need to tune my book. I love that.
Right.
Tuning it to the ear of how the words sing-songy came out or how they just, the syntax or the tonality or inflection of the sentence read to land with people and to land with your message, right? And land with the audience and land with people so they can feel what you're trying to convey.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. I mean,
very
there's so many
hands-on.
layers to life, and what I found was when I approached this as an expression of life, there were so many layers to this project. Like, I spent several years building the architecture for the project beneath the surface
Okay, how
because I was
soon?
just so I really wanted to honor what I thought was trying to come through, and I
Okay, now
didn't
you
know
got
I
me
was going to do what
fired
I
up,
did.
Seva. When can we see the book? When can we read it? When?
Before Christmas, you'll be able to put your orders in for it, and I'll be shipping it
Yes.
out
Okay,
soon after
so
that. So,
Alejo, we love Alejo so much. Alejo is the one filming all this,
eh,
producing it. I call him the video master. He's also just a producer
he's our
genius, and
creative sensei.
I call him my synchro bro, like synchronicity brother. So I know if you have the links, Alejo could put it in the details below
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
podcast, and
Absolutely.
so people can order.
Yeah, I'll have that up there. I'll pass it on to
Fantastic.
Leho.
Oh my
Thank
gosh.
you.
Anything else?
Yeah. Wow, this is such a blessing. I
Yes.
look forward
Thank you
to
so much, brother.
yeah, thank you for
Really.
sharing just
Peace to
in the
you.
way that you're living your life even. I just want to
Thank you,
honor
my
it
man. Amen.
as an example of a vibration that we need in the world.
Thank you.
So,
Likewise, brothers.
yeah.
Kin- kindred spirits and
Absolutely.
kindred flames.
All right.
All right. Peace to you.